but he was kind of doing it on his own. He wasn't working with anybody who knew anything. And he became so toxic that he became extremely ill, that he became dead.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Well, then,
he was using drugs too, but that wasn't decided to be the cause of his death.
so does it, when Schultz says about the gallstones in your liver and, you know, all that kind of stuff, is that really true? I mean, do you actually, are they really impairing one's body so much that they can't purify? Is that?
You know, I tell you what, well, I'll come back, I'll do another talk sometime this year just about detoxification.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, these are good questions, but I realize it's, we could spend the whole afternoon talking about it, so we should spend the whole afternoon talking about do-it-yourself detox. Yeah.
You said if you give up a certain kind of food, and for a period of time, and your body kind of gets used to not having that and having to deal with the stress that adds. But then if you introduce it maybe at a party, the example, and someone has a huge reaction, what my mind does with that is, well, rather than eliminate that item, dairy, wheat, whatever it is, reduce it dramatically, but then maybe keep a little bit in the system so that you don't have to be 100% off or nothing.
Yeah, well, let me tell you why that's not a good idea.
Okay.
So here's, so you gave up gluten, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, you eat it now?
Well, I don't react to it. I am not celiac.
Right.
And now if I say, oh, I'm going to have a little piece of bread one day.
But you're aware you don't want to overdo that.
Oh no, I just one day I have a,
Okay.
you know, if I have a cappuccino a month, I gave up milk 30 years ago. I can handle a cappuccino a month.
Okay, yeah.
If I go to Spain and have cappuccino 3 days in a row, I get sick.
Right. So
it's like, what?
So let's talk. We're talking. So some of the I said I wanted to talk a little about celiac. So this second part of the talk is about. And in fact, hold on a second. Let me just do something here. We're going to be talking about. Second part of the talk, we're going to be talking just about some of the science, but a lot of this. We're going to talk about celiac disease. So, first of all, Western medicine used to equate gluten sensitivity with celiac disease.
Yeah.
Do people know what celiac disease is?
No.
Okay, well let me just say real briefly what it is. If you have celiac disease, you basically are creating antibodies that destroy your small intestine. In other words, you eat wheat, and the reaction you have to the wheat explodes into something where it actually turns on you and you start reacting to your own tissues. So it's an autoimmune disorder, but the tissues that are attacked are the lining of your small intestine.
Is that leaky gut?
No, that's celiac disease.
Okay, sorry.
No, and so, but let me just say here. So one thing, let me just come back and let's just talk briefly about how this autoimmune thing works. And the autoimmunity is an important reaction because there's an element of autoimmunity in most people now with diabetes. They have kind of a mix of type 1 and type 2 diabetes. There's an element of autoimmunity in certain chronic eye diseases. There's an element of autoimmunity in heart disease. There's an element of autoimmunity in a lot of cancers. So this disordered immune system reaction is a part of a lot of the diseases that are killing us all and making us sick. But just to give you an idea, so say that this is, just to make it a schematic, say that this is a molecule of gluten, or one of the proteins that's in wheat that we develop a reaction to. Usually immune reactions involve proteins. And one of the problems with modern wheat is that modern wheat has 50 times more gluten than the ancient grains did, and it has a couple dozen new proteins that never existed in wheat before that we're more reactive to than gluten and that are never tested for. So if your doctor does a gluten test, he's not doing a test that's even looking at the proteins in modern wheat.
Yeah.
So, but what happens is that you develop, you eat this protein and your body makes a kind of antibody that comes along and tries to lock up this protein and take it out of commission because it doesn't like it. So this is the first. And so now you have an antigen, that's what you react to, and an antibody, that's what the body reacts with, so it creates an antibody. And if you're eating wheat all the time, all day, every day, floating around in your blood are these antigen-antibody complexes. Your body's trying to get rid of the antigen. And these are greatest concentration in your gut, because that's where the reaction first occurs. But after a while, the immune system, the definition of the immune system is a little complex, and no one even really knows what it is. Western medicine talks about the immune system as the immune system, we know what that is. Well, we don't. The definition of the immune system is probably closer to what Oriental medicine calls chi, or life force energy. It's measuring antibody levels or T cell levels or things like that. You're just kind of playing around the edges of something much bigger than what it is. So, the immune system is more than your white cells. It's the part of you that can tell the difference between self and other. Okay, so Suzanne's immune system knows what Suzanne is, and it knows what isn't Suzanne, and it doesn't like things that are floating around in the blood that aren't Suzanne, and so it attacks them. And so eventually the body, if these are floating around, these antigen antibody complexes are floating around all the time, it looks at this part of this, the antibody is from you, the antigen, the gluten or the protein from food, is other, and so this antigen antibody complex, eventually the body looks at it and it goes, wow, that's not really you. That's partly you and partly not you. And so along comes, you could develop a new antibody that tries now to go after this thing. And so this new antibody, these antigen antibodies, it's like a lock and key kind of thing. And so it's often this new antibody, this kind of second level antibody, that then attacks your tissues. And why, in some people, a reaction to gluten would attack your skin or your parotid gland or your esophagus, or one tissue, and in others it would attack their pancreas or their hips or their knees, or go after their thyroid and they have autoimmune thyroiditis, or why in one person it attacks this tissue and another person it attacks another, that's a mystery nobody understands. But there is a kind of commonality in all of these autoimmune disorders, which is that there's usually some kind of an initiating protein. And so I did my postgraduate work at UCLA, and when I was there, and still, there was a lot of work being done with looking at type 1 diabetes and the immune, type 1 diabetes. Diabetes has become all confused, because type 1 diabetes used to be juvenile diabetes, or juvenile onset, and type 2 diabetes was insulin-resistant diabetes or adult onset diabetes. And now you've got 8-year-olds getting insulin resistance diabetes, and you've got 50-year-olds getting type 1 diabetes, and so the whole language and the whole understanding has changed. But one of the things they found, Dr. Vojdani was a researcher down there, and what he found is that in a lot of kids, where the onset of their diabetes was quite early, the thing that had triggered the whole reaction that had destroyed their pancreas and made them incapable of making insulin was casein. It was the protein in milk. If these kids had never been fed milk, cow's milk, they would not be diabetic.
Wow.
And so I'm not saying that all kids with diabetes had milk as the initiator, but a lot of them do.
Would that be the organic whole milk from the?
Doesn't matter where it comes
from.
Or
it doesn't matter.
Yeah, okay. And realize too, this there's other bits of evidence about this. So yes, if you were going to be drinking cow's milk, organic, unpasteurized, unhomogenized, milk fresh off the farm, which is going to be the best milk you could have. But human beings, for the 200,000 years or more that human beings have been on Earth, they weren't chasing down animals and milking them and making cottage cheese. That's a very new addition to the human diet, and a lot of people don't do very well with it. And so, no matter where it comes from. And the other bit of information about that is that if you look at the medical anthropology, if you go back, just to the high, so people have heard of the Paleolithic diet?
Yeah.
Yeah, well that's named for a lot of data that's looked at what was going on with human beings in the Paleolithic age,
right,
which is about 50, 70,000 years ago. So if you go back 70,000 years, you find some interesting things. And there's a lot of, that's after, pretty much after the ice ages and things. So there's a lot of bones of human beings around to examine. And one of the things you find is that 70,000 years ago, human longevity was already well in place. So the average lifespan was still, only 30% of the people lived to be 70, 80, 90, 100. But a lot of people were living to be 70, 80, 90, 100. And if they were dying, it was usually from trauma or infection, not from diabetes or atherosclerotic disease or cancer or hypertension. They were
hunter-gatherers.
They were hunter-gatherers, and then you come down through history, and you follow the bony remains of human beings, because all of these things, diabetes, these ones I named, diabetes, hypertension, cancer, and atherosclerotic disease, all leave very clear evidence in the bones.
Yeah.
You can look at the bony remains of somebody who's 80 years old and decide, did they have any of those diseases? They did or they didn't. You can look at the bony remains of tens of thousands of human beings and decide, did they have any of these diseases? And you don't. So the diseases that are the major cause of death now, the diseases that are killing us all, really didn't appear in any great numbers until the advent of agriculture. When people started eating agricultural foods as their mainstays, those diseases started showing up.
All grains?
Grains, yeah.
But in 70, 80,000 years ago, did they cook anything or everything was raw? Like meat raw and
No.
gather the stuff?
One of the things that the rise of human civilization is attributed to fire. And fire and cooking meat started with pre-Homo sapien. So Homo erectus was already, 1.5 million years ago, was using fire and cooking meat. And because that gave human beings access to concentrated calories. That's the theory, is that cooked food, especially cooked meat, is one of the reasons why it contributed to human longevity. It contributed to, and human longevity, having multiple generations around at the same time, is what allowed the rise of human culture. That you didn't have to reinvent the wheel every generation.
But at the same time, isn't it, there are some research done at Harvard and many other places that see the correlation between meat eating and cancer? That those who eat more meat, they suffer more of different diseases, including cancer.
Yeah, well, that's the what was it? Forks Over Knives, Davies. Yeah. Yes, there is a correlation between how much meat you eat, but realizing that the zero meat, is not necessarily what you have to shoot for. So being vegan isn't necessarily, but eating a huge piece of steak every night, that's not good for you either. So it's complex, because back when people were hunters and gatherers and eating meat, they were also not eating grains, they weren't eating dairy, they weren't eating legumes, and so it's a complex thing. But in this mix of what we eat today, it's not clear if the effects that meat have on cancer are in that complex combination with all the other foods we're eating. And this again, it gets back to one of my biggest complaints about modern nutritional science. And I have a lot of complaints about modern nutritional science. I just need to be honest with you.
Would you tell us, please?
Well, no, but yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things, I was actually at a conference. I was at another conference that was in the same hotel, but this was a huge conference for the American Nutritional Association, and I mean there were thousands of people there. And went to one of the plenary the big sessions in the big hall, just to see what they were talking about. And they were talking about, somebody stood up, a PhD in nutrition, stood up in front of these thousands of people and said with a straight face that Pop-Tarts were a good breakfast for school kids.
And he was a nutritionist?
She was, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
She wasn't kidding.
No, they were talking about recommendations they were making to the government about the school breakfast and lunch program.
Well, then guess what? They're lying. They know better.
Well, I don't know, but the way you can come to believe something like that is you look at nutrition as the sum of a lot of small parts. So you look at every 5 years there's an update of the nutritional guidelines for the American people, and that just is coming out now for 2015. And if you read through those guidelines, it's talking about how much B6 do you need, and how much magnesium do you need, and how much protein do you need, and it's trying to say that you can look at each of these little pieces individually, and that will give you a total picture of nutrition, and it's not. You know, the nutrition is everything you put in your mouth and where it came from and how you prepare it, and so it's how it was grown. You know, how all kinds of things. So it's not a piecemeal kind of thing. So, you know, to focus on just meat, yeah, meat's okay in adequate amounts, but even protein, since you asked that question, you know, there's been a lot of work. What is the protein, the minimum protein requirement to stay healthy for a human being?
Yeah.
And we're not talking meat, but meat could be your source of that. But if you're eating meat, you only need about 30 grams of high quality protein a day. That's a very minimum amount. That's about, and when they make the recommendations for how much protein do you need, they say more like 60. There's a fudge factor in there because it assumes you might not be eating high quality protein. But 30 grams of high quality protein, and that's an ounce